That's
30
right.
seconds.
Done.
On the set.
Turn this off.
Get the sprinkles going.
It's off.
Good job.
Good evening. I'm Henrietta Burroughs, coming to you live from the Midpen Media Center's studio in Palo Alto. I am the founder and editor-in-chief of the East Palo Alto newspaper, and some of you might also recognize me as the host of the locally syndicated TV show, Talking with Henrietta. I have the pleasure tonight of talking with several show guests who are very knowledgeable about election issues in East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and in the county of San Mateo as a whole. Seated here in the studio with me is Bernadette Burns from the League of Women Voters, South San Mateo County. And seated beside her is East Palo Alto City Council member Carlos Romero, who has served several terms on the East Palo Alto City Council. We'll also have an election expert, Jim Irizarry, who is the Assistant Assessor, County Clerk Recorder, and the Assistant Chief Elections Officer for San Mateo County. And Jim will be joining us by phone. So thank you so much for being here. It's a joy just to have you comment on the election. And I hope Jim is with us. Can you hear us, Jim? Are you there?
Yes, I am, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight.
Yes, fantastic. Well, I'm going to ask all of you if you've noticed anything different about this midterm election. So, Jim, let me start with you. Have you noticed in terms of returns whether it's much, much larger voting than previous midterm elections?
Absolutely. Our returns are going at a very good clip right now. As of today, we have received 170,000 ballots. Now, that's a raw count. Those are ballots that have come basically through the mail or have been dropped off at ballot drop-off locations, vote centers, etc. And we have 21,864 ballots that have actually been cast at the polls. And of course, this is county-wide. And we also reached a new milestone in San Mateo County elections history in that on Friday, our registered voter number exceeded 400. We elapsed 400,000 registered voters in San Mateo County, and that's the first, all indicative of a very active electorate and participating in this election.
Well, do you know, Carlos was commenting earlier before we started talking about a first in San Mateo County with the mail-in ballot and some things that made it easier for East Palo Alto residents to vote. So Carlos, what do you think? You were talking about the new system that you'd noticed in terms of voting.
You know, before I answer that question, actually, may I ask Jim a question? So, Jim, are you saying that the county is voting at about 49%, roughly speaking? If it's, I think with those numbers, you're maybe at 197,000 total votes cast, or do you think it's going to be higher than that?
Oh, it'll be much higher than that.
Okay.
What we're looking at right now are the ballots that we recorded that have come through the door or we know that have been cast at the vote centers. But if you take a look at our June election, we had over 70,000 ballots come in from Election Day +3. And Election Day +3 means that the election code allows ballots to be mailed all the way through Election Day, midnight, to have a postmark, and received by the elections official within 3 days, and in this case, Friday, November 9th. So we still have all of those ballots that have to be processed between now and Friday that are still out there. And that's a significant number when one considers that the June election, while it was a large election under the California Voters' Choice Act, and I can talk a little bit more about that to just give an overview, this election far exceeds those numbers. So we're going to have a lot more ballots being processed and canvassed before the certification of the vote.
Yeah.
Okay, so
But getting back to this issue, yeah, I think certainly I was in favor of the all-mail ballot. One of the biggest concerns, though, I had coming from a low-income community of color was, you know, whether or not we were going to be able to roll this out in such a way that there wasn't going to be confusion. We as a community tend to vote, we're voting pretty strongly at the polls themselves in the past, and what we saw today actually was a fair number of people who actually went to the polls. And at the close of the polls, actually, at both of our polling sites, we have kind of a regional center, and then we also have our city council, or the city hall where we vote. At both polls, there were probably about 120 people outside of the polls that had not been able to get in at 8 o'clock. They were able to vote, but there was a line of 120 at one of the centers, and at the other center, I think it was about 50. So clearly, I think there may be some little glitches in terms of trying to get our residents through to actually vote. Now, they all voted, but you know, many people were waiting an hour.
So do you think they realized that there was a change in the voting?
Well, I do know from some early reports in the morning where we actually had people who were still going to their previous polls, and we actually called the county, and they did do this. We asked the county to place information at all of the previous polls so people would know that they could go to 2 vote centers within East Palo Alto. Critically important.
Let us talk, and Jim, I want you to chime in, and also Bernadette, and of course Carlos. What is it that you think triggered this massive turnout for a midterm?
Well, from the county's perspective, we're part of the California Voters' Choice Act. We are a leader in the state of California in all-mail ballot elections. We were selected by the state legislature to conduct all-mail ballot vote center elections in San Mateo County. And so that is a new election model where individuals, every registered voter in San Mateo County receives a ballot in the mail 29 days before the election. And then, in addition to that, we open vote centers 29 days before the election. And so the Voter Choice Act basically is just that. It is designed to provide choices to voters, whether you can vote at the ease and convenience of your home with an all-mail ballot. You can come to a vote center. You can cast a electronic ballot on a voting machine. You can cast a paper ballot. You can get a new ballot issued. You can register to vote. But I would like to speak to the issue of the voters that are at the vote centers right now. What we are finding is by far and away, the voters that have come to the vote centers today are conditional registered voters. In other words, voting registration has a 15-day requirement in the state of California. That automatically gets you into the system, and then we can get you a ballot in the mail and put you as a registered voter. However, those voters who have not registered to vote on the 15th day now have a new option. And that option is increasing voter participation in the process.
So
And that
you know,
option is
Jim, if I could stop you for a moment, you can make it as easy as you'd like for voters to vote, but that doesn't necessarily make them vote. And so I would like to know, and I haven't heard anything from Bernadette yet, if there were certain issues that you think made people such active voters.
Well, certainly there are a lot of propositions on the state ballot, some of them quite contentious. And as we were saying earlier, some of the advertising that has been surrounding them is very inflammatory. So one of the things that the League has done is go out and talk about the pros and cons of the propositions in a neutral manner so that people can be informed about them and make a choice. And I think, you know, both in the local elections and statewide, transportation and housing have been huge issues, and several of these relate to that. And there are also many, both county and local races that I think are very interesting. So that I believe that has pushed turnout.
Okay, so Jim, Bernadette mentioned transportation and housing. I'll hear from Carlos, and then I'd like to get back to you with what maybe the numbers are showing now. So Carlos, what is it that you think? Were there issues on the ballot that you think sparked people's interest more than usual?
Well, let me just say, I think we have to put this context, we have to put this election in the context of the national election, right? And the election of congressional seats and the possibility that actually the House may, you know, switch hands.
Which it has already, according to the results I've heard.
I do not believe that California is immune to, you know, that energy, right? And I think that when people see that indeed there could be change involved, people go and vote. Whether, you know, we're going to make a big difference, at least in San Mateo County, to flip the House, we won't. But nevertheless, that energy gets translated into other voters voting on other issues. So, you know, locally, I mean, you know, we have Measure W, which is a very important, I think, transportation issue. It's been a little contentious. It's very close, right? But, you know, that paired with Prop 6, which I think many cities around the state have benefited from already. East Palo Alto has benefited from it with an infusion of cash of about $600,000. It will actually allow us to redo 2 whole streets in the city of East Palo Alto.
So talk about Prop W, what it was all about.
Right. So Prop W is a half-cent tax in the county of San Mateo, right, that will generate a significant amount of money for transportation-related issues. But what's really interesting about the proposition is that 50% of it will actually go to support public transit, which is unheard of in many of these ballot initiatives, because what we're trying to do is reduce traffic and congestion. And one of the ways to do that is indeed to make investments in our public transit system so that people can get out of their cars, right, reduce the greenhouse gases and the vehicle miles traveled, so that indeed we can have a better environment and a kind of less congested, you know, less congested commutes.
Sure. Now, Jim, do you have any results right now? Bernadette mentioned transportation and housing, and Carlos also mentioned transportation. Any results in terms of the propositions?
Yes, we're very low in terms of the numbers that are actually being processed right now, because again, the majority of the ballots that we're looking at that we're actually processing came in late yesterday. So all the ballots today are not getting into these numbers. So what we have at this juncture, we have as of the 9:30 report, let me see how many, the percent here that we've got of returns. Trying to get there. Just 1 second.
So while you're looking, my colleagues here in the studio are kind of looking over what results that they have.
Right.
Figures
Well,
that-
we have right now reporting approximately 17, almost 18% of the total ballots, you know, of registered voters, and also the ballots that have been sent out. About 17% of those are what's being actually reported at this moment. So it's far too early in the game. You know, we see it's hard to make any predictions or any trends off of these early numbers.
Okay. Measure HH was a big issue in this election. So say something about Measure HH and what figures you have, and I'll ask Jim what figures he might have.
Well, again, I agree that housing and transportation have been big issues within the state. Certainly in our county, through Measure W. In East Palo Alto, we have rent control, but we also have an incredible need to build new affordable housing. HH actually would tax commercial offices $2.50 per square foot per year, generating right now about $1.65 million for affordable housing and for job training programs in tech and the construction fields. And right now, it needs 66% to pass, and the last I checked, which was about an hour ago, it was at 74.6% in favor, which right now it seems to be trending in the right direction, 25.4 against.
Okay, so Jim, we heard the figure from Carlos. Do you have an update in terms of that for Measure
That
H?
is the 10 o'clock report, which I'm looking at right now. We have, one moment, we have right now 74.60 as of the 10 o'clock report. Percent of the vote for HA is yes, and 25.34% no. That's as of our 10 o'clock report.
So that seems to be a measure that's passing, a measure that's passing. So what do you think, Jim, in the few minutes that we have left, the big turnout for this midterm might portend for the future? Anything?
Yes. First of all, I think it is a credit to the visionary leadership that we have here in this county to do all-mail ballot elections. By that very measure being in place in the county, you're going to see an increase in voting participation. It's created a network of community-based organizations and community partners. And so we have civic engagement going on at unprecedented levels. I think that is a very, very positive outcome of that effort. And I just see an increasingly engaged voting public, and that's only good for our democracy and voter participation.
Sure. Carlos, do you have anything to add as a city council member in East Palo Alto?
Well, I would agree with Jim that anything we can do to expand the franchise, to make it easier to vote, is what a democracy is all about. And I do agree that in this county, we were kind of the trailblazers on this. I do still think there are a few kinks to work out, right? I think not all those people who were in those long lines were actually voting provisionally. Many people decided that they couldn't find their ballots, right? Or could not find their ballots, and they went to the polls, and there was a process they had to go through, and they understood that. But I think in the future, I hope very much that we get more and more folks actually filling out their ballots beforehand and mailing them in or dropping them off, because and I think that's part of an educational process that we as city elected folks need to do, as well as Mark Church and folks over at the county. But I think we're trending in the right direction in terms of expanding democracy.
So we've heard about how the ease of voting is also bringing people out. And Bernadette, you are involved in the whole area of education. What about the education in terms of getting voters up to date and up to speed in terms of the issues? That's where the League of Women Voters has concentrated.
We do a lot of outreach on that, and it's made, it's wonderful that we have 29 days or more in which to vote. It's made our job a little more difficult in getting out information about the propositions and things in a reasonable time frame for people who may want to vote early on. Although, given what we've seen in the timing of when people vote, and I dropped off my ballot on June 5th in the afternoon, and there were people out the door at the last election, and at this one too, people seem to have, procrastinated. And I think, like you said, for all of us, that is some education. We do need to, and we have tried very hard to get the candidate forums and our pros and cons presentations in a timely fashion, but that does require coordination.
Sure.
But then we also have to tell people now don't wait till the last minute to vote.
Yeah, yeah.
And
a
we'll make
plug-
Jim's job easier.
So
And a
Jim, would
plug
that
for
make
Voters
you?
Edge.
Yes.
which is
Okay. Okay. So in the 30
Thank you,
seconds
Carl.
that we have, Jim, I'll let you share the final words.
Well, first of all, I agree with the councilman, and that is that elections is a continuous improvement process. And we have our citizen committees established by our Chief Elections Officer, Mark Church, to give advice on how we can improve the system. I actively encourage our voting public to participate on those committees. That's our Voter Education and Outreach Committee, our Language Accessibility Advisory Committee, and our Voting Accessibility Advisory Committee.
Thank
That's
you
how
so
you
much.
actually-
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry we're out of time, but I'd like to thank you, Jim. I'd like to thank you, Bernadette. Thank you so much, Carlos. I'd like to thank our viewers for watching. I'd like to thank our partners at KMVT and Korea TV, and certainly the viewers. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it over now to Mountain View. That'll pick up from here. Thanks so much. That's it.
That went fast.
Yes, that's 20 minutes.
Just keep talking.
Okay.